Okay, picking up where we left off on page 451, we're talking now about the satisficing model. And the satisficing model basically means, the difference between the absolute perfect answer and an answer that's close is probably negligible. For example, going back to the example I always talk about, at McDonald's trying to figure out where to put the next franchise store. So you've kind of sort of picked this is where you want it. And so the question now is it going to be, on this block or one block over? Okay, that's what you're trying to do now. They're probably, if you were to do enough study, commission a study to figure traffic patterns and spend, $10,000 to figure this out, you could probably tell that block A was probably going to be better than block B. Okay, they're only like 100 yards apart. So, is it going to be worth my time and energy to spend $10,000 to find out what the perfect answer is? Or is any one of those good enough? And more than likely, good enough. Because whether the store was one block away would probably make no difference whatsoever in the amount of sales that the store is going to get. I mean, come on. So no one's going to spend $10,000 to get the perfect answer. So satisficing basically means is get me close, because all the ones that are close are probably equally valid. Okay? In other words, the difference between the top 10 is negligible. So as long as you get me in the top 10, I'm in good shape. Okay, let's continue. So that kind of fits along with the semi-structured, where I've got an awful lot of the data, but I don't necessarily have everything. And I realize that either through time constraints or money constraints, it's just not worth it for me to go for an optimizing model. So satisficing is used a great deal. Okay. The next one talks about heuristics. And heuristics is the rule of thumb. So somebody decided, here's a rule of thumb. Don't allow a total accounts payable to exceed cash on hand by more than 50%. Okay, somebody just made up a rule and said, this is kind of what we ought to be doing here. And so one of the rules could be, hey, if the queue length at the grocery store line gets to 5, then open another register. It's just a rule of thumb that somebody came up with. Now, the person who came up with this was probably, had a lot of experience and knows what they're doing, okay? But for you to use an existing rule of thumb takes like zero experience. You just look at the rule and go, okay, time to open another cash line, or hey, I need to do something with my accounts payable. So using it takes practically no experience whatsoever. You just go on about your business. Okay, so let's continue. The next thing to talk about is the benefits of using one of these systems. It's not all roses here, right? So before we start talking about the benefits, let's do kind of like an overview. What is this thing all about? Well, it's designed to, provide managers with good information that they can use to make good decisions. And so the quality of the data is, very important, because if I get poor data, I'm probably going to make poor decisions. So let's look at their benefits. Well, I get good decision quality. Why? Because I got good data. It works well when the problem has an awful lot of complexity. The more complex the problem is, the more likely you're going to need a decision support system to help you. Even if it's something simple like, I'm trying to schedule next week's production line at the factory, and if I build a bunch of these cheap items, my profit's going to be kind of low. So if I build a bunch of these expensive items, my profit will be a little high. So the kind of things we did in the Excel class with the solver. So, but anyway, it's complex, and I can't just do it by myself. I need some help. Cool. And speedier decisions, because otherwise, it might take you a couple of days to figure it out, and I really need to produce that schedule for the factory line like today. So those are all great benefits. Now, there are some negative benefits? Yeah, I guess that's a weird term. Anyway, negative impacts, and of course, all of them are about, these things aren't free. You got to buy our hardware and software, and you got to train people, and all the rest of the stuff. So yeah, putting together all this stuff does cost money. Most people, if you're in a relatively big size organization, this is somewhat negligible, because you probably already have hardware and software and staff and a database, right? Most likely. So this is just icing on the cake. It's a few minor little extra things you have to deal with, but most likely this is a sunk cost anyway. Okay. The next thing is the overview. The overview of a management information system. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. There's a cool little catchphrase here that I really like. And the thing is, this is it. The important role of an MIS is to provide the right information to the right person in the right format at the right time. That's the mantra of an MIS. So, MIS is really about getting information in the proper format so people can make decisions. So, I highlighted that because that might be something that might appear on a quiz. What do you think? Okay, let's continue. Here's an example of an MIS kind of a thing. And we've seen lots of different variations. It's the exact same thing. So let's just kind of go through it. So here is my TPS system. My TPS system is pulling data from the databases and inputs and all the rest of this stuff. Okay, so this part we've already talked about from the last chapter. So our chapter starts basically right here. And our chapter is about the management information piece, where I have other corporate data and databases of external stuff. And I have a bunch of reports, and I have some other stuff. And so I have the decision support system and the executive support system and specialized and blah, 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 blah. So I think the real takeaway on this thing is these things are all combined together. The TPS, whether it be inside an ERP or not, kind of dovetails into this MIS system. And if this was being shown on an information pyramid, it'd be like that. You know, the TPS at the bottom, the MIS next, the decision support system next, and there's some more up there we'll get to in a future chapter. Okay. So the first thing to talk about is where do we get the inputs for these things? So let's just... most of the data from an MIS is probably going to be internal to your own organization. It's going to come from the TPS, the transaction processing system, whether or not it's inside an ERP or not, it's not relevant. So the MIS is going to pull data from you. Now, is that all it's going to do? Well, of course not. For example, I need an awful lot of external data too. Let's say I'm Apple and I'm producing a new phone. Can I afford to not even look at what other people are charging for phones? Well, the answer, if you're Apple, yeah, they can charge anything they dang well please. But if you're any other manufacturer other than Apple, I need other external data. I need to know what the screen size is of my competitor. What are the features of my competitor? What is the cost point? I need tons of information that's not in my system. So I need extra stuff. So I got the TPS, ERP, and related. Then I have external data. Could be from the customers and suppliers and competitors, stockholders, all the stuff that is not from you. Okay? Cool. Let's continue. Outputs. The first output they talk about is the executive dashboard. There's a little figure down here of an example of one. There's a company out there called CISK that kind of does this for a living. You can actually have them come in and they'll look at your key indicator reports, you know, that kind of stuff. They'll actually help you define what your key indicators are. And they'll produce these cool little dashboards. I saw a product demo and where they came in and they actually put like a toolbar on the bottom of a Windows computer, a toolbar that stayed anchored down at the bottom that had, you know, all the key indicators for this one manager. And it was pretty cool. And it was kind of simple. It's like, you know, red, amber, green kind of a thing like this. Slightly simpler than this example because it had to fit in a small spot. And it allowed them to kind of click on and drill down and get some other answers. But the idea is that the manager could just glance over his computer and go, hey, what's going on over there in the sales department? How come they're red? You know, that kind of simple stuff. Okay, so executive dashboard is good stuff. The example here, they talk about a manager for a hotel. You know, how many occupied rooms, you know, how many of them are in bad shape, or, you know, length of stay, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is reports. And there's lots of different kinds of reports. The first one is called a scheduled report. A scheduled report typically means that no human said, hey, I want that report. These are reports that just spit out automatically, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever the frequency is. So it's scheduled to actually just produce these reports, and hopefully somebody's looking at them. But typically, no one comes up and says, could you run this report? Because if they did, you'd say, well, pardon me, here it is, and just hand it to them, okay? So scheduled reports are just typically run on a routine basis, and they produce, the quarterly, performance reviews and, stockholders report, all the things that companies need to do business. A key indicator report, this is more like what we're talking about on the dashboard, was probably like a summary of everything that's going on in your business. Now, the key indicator report for the manager in sales is not going to be the same as the key indicator for the manager in engineering or manufacturing or logistics, right? So everyone gets their own set of key indicators. So a key indicator report is typically very, very tailored to the audience. Okay, so that's another kind of report. The next one they talk about is demand reports. Demand reports are the ones where you do go up and say, it's been a while since I've looked at the kumquat report. Let me run one of those. And so it doesn't spit out automatically. It waits for a human to say, hey, I want one of those. So you hit the button, out pops the report. That's the only real difference. We're not saying that the scheduled reports are less important or more important than a demand report. It's just the technique you use to deliver them. One is delivered automatically without asking, and the other just waits until you say, I'd like it. That's it. The next one I'm talking about is exception reports. Now, there's a common misconception that people think of exception reports as being bad. Exception reports are not that. Exception reports are things that are out of the ordinary. I get a report every day that tells me when one of my stores is either above or below what I think their sales target ought to be for that day. Okay? Not always bad, because if they get above, I'm going to send them a little note saying, congratulations, look like you were 22% above the sales average this month. Good job. Woohoo! So an exception report just means out of the ordinary. It does not mean something bad happened. Of course, or out of the ordinary could be bad. Like, you were 22% below the average sales in that store. Well, yeah, so it could be a bad thing, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Okay. Typically, we're going to have like trigger points, where you're going to have something that built into the report. In some cases, the report will not print at all unless some trigger occurs. So the profit, sales figures on a weekly basis, for example. And as long as you're inside this acceptable band, nothing gets printed. If you're above that, you get an exception report. If you're below that, you get an exception report. But if everyone is kind of sort of doing normal, I get no reports whatsoever. Okay? So, in review, scheduled, you always get. Demand, you get when you ask. Exception just happens whenever something occurs or doesn't occur or whatever. Some sort of a trigger causes these reports to occur. Cool. A drill down report really isn't in the same category, but it's a good discussion point. A drill down report is one of those things like that dashboard we talked about, where I get to see a summary of the data, and then I go, well, looks like sales is in red. So I click on it, and it drills down to provide me sales by country. And I go, ooh, the one in France is bad. That's the reason why I'm red. So I click on the one in France, and it brings me to a little, I can just drill down, and drill down. Now, it should be fairly obvious that drill down reports can't be on paper, right? Because I can't drill down on a piece of paper. I can only drill down on some sort of an electronic report. So up to now, these things could be anything. They could be paper, but drill down cannot. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.